Every drop of blood and sweat and tears, and where we're at in the series, we will unlikely ever film.
I flew my spiritual director out just to be with me while we were filming The Last Supper. It's done more for me personally than anything else, and I think the thing that I have to remember is that there's a cooperation happening between myself and God.
I understand the weight. I understand the reality of what it is we believe and what that host represents.
Jonathan Rumi is not just acting anymore. In this moment, he breaks. Not in the theatrical sense, not for drama, but in a way that left the entire cast and crew of The Chosen stunned, silent, and shaken. Cameras were rolling. The lights were set. The script had been rehearsed for weeks. And yet, when it came time to film the foot-washing and Last Supper scene, known among the cast as the Diana moment, something cracked open deep within him. It started like any other take. Jonathan, playing Jesus, walked into the scene to begin washing the feet of his disciples. There was a reverence already in the air, the kind of sacred weight that rarely happens on a film set. Everyone felt it, but nobody expected what happened next. As he knelt before the actor portraying Thomas, Jonathan reached for the cloth, dipped it into the water, and gently began to clean his feet. That single action triggered a flood of emotion he didn't see coming. His breath shortened. His eyes welled up. He tried to push through it. After all, this was a scene he'd prepared for. But something about the intimacy of that gesture, the weight of what it meant, shattered the thin line between actor and character. The studio lights might as well have disappeared. What stood there wasn't just Jonathan playing Jesus. It was a man coming face to face with the gravity of Christ's servanthood, and it overwhelmed him.
Stand the weight. I understand the reality of what it is we believe and what that host represents and what that bread and that wine, once the Holy Spirit comes down and changes them, what that actually means to us and who that actually is now that we are about to receive. And so know that every drop of blood and sweat and tears, and there were many tears going into these scenes for many, many reasons, but the primary being that look what we get to experience.
I hope it lands the way it felt when we did it, because there were moments where many of us were just kind of like wiping the tears from our eyes, just, you know, right after the scene or during the scene, you know. It's really, truly.
The tears began to fall, not as part of the script, but as a reaction so real it became undeniable. The actor receiving the foot washing later shared that he had to look away to keep from sobbing himself. The emotion wasn't just Jonathan's. It spread like a holy fire across the set. People stopped what they were doing. Crew members put down their equipment. The sound team slowly lowered their boom mics. Even Dallas Jenkins, the director, didn't yell cut. No one wanted to interrupt what was happening. In the quiet of that moment, the camera continued to roll, not just capturing a performance, but documenting an encounter. One that many on set would later describe as a form of worship. And just when it seemed the emotions might settle, the next layer of the scene began. The chanting of the word Danu. Danu, a Hebrew phrase meaning "it would have been enough," is traditionally used during the Jewish Passover to acknowledge each of God's acts of mercy. If you had only brought us out of Egypt, it would have been enough. If you had only parted the Red Sea, it would have been enough. As each line was recited, the tension in the room didn't ease. It intensified, because this wasn't just a historical reenactment. It was a cry from the heart of each cast member. They were no longer acting out gratitude. They were experiencing it in real time. And that gratitude, that awe of God's love, began to crush them. Not with weight, but with wonder. And then came the unscripted moment that fully wrecked the room. As the actors around the table continued the Danu chant, someone added a final line. If you had only loved us, it would have been enough. But you went further, you died. That line wasn't in the script. It wasn't planned, but it silenced the room like thunder. That's when Jonathan, still on his knees, broke down entirely. His shoulders trembled. His voice cracked. He looked around the table, not at fellow actors, but at the faces of people who now felt like brothers.
In 5, we start on a high, we end in an incredible low. I've lost a bit of weight. I've got a little bit more to go, I think, to kind of fulfill my ideal of what that image should look like. And then emotionally, I think the context is all I have to really consider, and the sorrow behind all of the people that are connected to that narrative.
The crew couldn't go on. People stepped out to cry in private. Others hugged each other, too emotionally disoriented to speak. Dallas finally called for a break, but not before standing in silence for several long seconds, holding back his own tears. The emotional peak of the scene wasn't the bread or the wine. It wasn't even the dialogue. It was the foot washing. And even more than that, it was the moment Jonathan Rumi bent before the man playing Judas. Everyone knew what was coming. The betrayal, the kiss, the crucifixion. And yet here was Jesus, washing the feet of the very one who would hand him over to death. As Jonathan lifted the actor's foot into his hands, time seemed to stop. The weight of that gesture, the mercy it implied, was almost too much to bear. The man playing Judas later said he could barely look Jonathan in the eye. What do you do when a man you will betray kneels before you in love? In that moment, no one had an answer. There were no more lines, just tears. And yet, this was only part of the story. Because what happened after the scene, after the cameras shut off and the cast walked away, would leave even more lasting marks. There were prayers, confessions, and moments so raw they were never caught on film. Part 2 will reveal what was said off camera, how Jonathan described this moment afterward, and what message from God he believed was spoken into the room that day. But before that, let's what Jonathan Moore had to say, which confirms all our doubts as he himself. There is something, he is closely being watched by God.
That there's a cooperation happening between myself and God, and as long as I continue to serve throughout all this, things are good, and stay low. Less of me, more of he, as my friend Kevin James would say. He said that once we were filming a movie coming out in the fall, actually called Solo Mio, and that phrase would come up because as we talk about like faith.
Coming back to scene now, no one called cut, because no one could. The cameras were still rolling. The mic's still hot. But no director dared interrupt what was clearly something far greater than a scene. It was like time itself had paused inside that room. And as Jonathan also mentioned, when Jonathan collapsed into himself, it wasn't a Hollywood breakdown. It was spiritual overflow. He was playing Jesus washing his disciples' feet. But in that moment, he wasn't playing anything. He was living it, carrying it. And the man who broke was not breaking from pressure. He was breaking from revelation. As the cast looked on, something eerie happened. They didn't rush to help him. Not because they didn't care, but because they were frozen in place. Some were crying, some just staring. Others had quietly removed their sandals, unsure if the cameras would capture what came next, or if they were even supposed to move. They say when God enters a room, silence follows. This was that kind of silence. The cast later said they felt like they weren't acting anymore. They were witnessing something sacred that made the lights and cameras disappear. And what triggered all this? A single Hebrew word. It means it would have been enough. The line had already been written in the script, of course. But when Jonathan opened his mouth to say it, he choked. Not because he forgot, but because the truth of the word caught him in the chest.
Out just to be with me while we were filming The Last Supper, and part of Gethsemane as well, because I just wanted to be armed with as much spiritual firepower as possible. And so, he was in a room praying for me, and he said Mass. He's a priest, so he said Mass for me that day, and so it was really, I felt very sort of...
He whispered it again, barely audible this time, and finally, he said it out loud. But as he did, the floodgates opened.
There's not any real sort of paint by numbers. I mean, there's techniques and stuff that I wouldn't bore you with, but there's, I think I have to consider things moment to moment, and on the day, you just don't know. Like, the instrument is a fickle thing. Yeah.
For a show that's meticulously blocked, timed, and rehearsed, this was not planned. But that's what made it holy. One of the crew members said it felt like the room was being watched. Not by cameras, but by something bigger. There were veteran actors on that set who had performed Shakespeare on stage, won awards, done decades of television. But they walked away from this moment changed. Not as professionals, but as people. One cast member later admitted in an interview, "It felt like Jesus showed up and we just happened to be holding cameras." They didn't say that for clicks. They said that because they couldn't explain it any other way. What makes this even more miraculous is that the Danu line wasn't originally the emotional center of the scene. It was a quiet moment. One line. That's it. But when Jonathan wept, it restructured everything. Directors rewrote the flow. Editors restructured the cut. Even the soundtrack was altered to follow the emotional architecture laid down by a man who simply surrendered, mid-take. And when the cast tried to continue filming, they couldn't. More than one actor had to leave the room. Some were too shaken to finish the scene. Dallas Jenkins, the director, later said, "We've captured some powerful moments before. But that day, it was like heaven cracked open." The Hebrew word Danu is sung in traditional Passover songs as a repeated refrain. It would have been enough. If God had only led us out of Egypt, if he had only split the Red Sea, if he had only fed us in the wilderness. Each line is followed by Danu. It's a spiritual statement of contentment and awe, that just one of God's acts would have been more than enough. But Jonathan wasn't reciting this as a line. He was feeling the weight of Jesus, who didn't just do one thing. He did everything. And now, as Jesus prepares to be betrayed, tortured, and killed, he's washing the feet of the very man who would sell him out. And he still says, Danu. It's this contradiction, mercy in the face of betrayal, that overwhelmed Jonathan. In the room, when the episode aired, social media exploded. Not with trending hashtags, but with testimonies.
When I last left my house, I took a look around and I thought, the next time I see this place, I will have completed the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I was overwhelmed with emotion, because that means the journey's almost over. And I've spent the better part of 6 years with my best mate, talking to him and asking him for advice, and how do I play this scene, and what did he go through, and allow me even a modicum of the experience that you had, even like a percent of a percent of a percent, to be able to understand authentically and portray authentically what you went through. And when I don't necessarily have that anymore, I don't know. So despite everything, I'm trying to be as present as I can every step of the way, in a way that I hadn't been even the first 4 seasons, because I wasn't thinking about the cross. I wasn't thinking about the end. But especially as I consider the end, I'm like doubly present. I'm like...
People said they couldn't watch without crying. Others paused the episode just to pray. Some said they hadn't read the Bible in years, but this one moment made them open it again. One fan wrote, "I've seen hundreds of Jesus movies, but this one scene made me feel like I was in the room. And it broke me. I didn't expect to cry, but I couldn't stop." Another commented, "I kept thinking, would I have let him wash my feet?" And the answer scared me. In a behind-the-scenes video, Jonathan Rumi tried to explain what happened, but even he stumbled. He said he didn't remember much after saying the word, that something washed over him, and that when he finally stood back up, he felt like he had left something on the floor. He didn't mean a prop. He meant a piece of himself. And that's what makes this different from acting. This wasn't about nailing a take. It was about surrendering to something far bigger than the script. In the end, this wasn't just a scene in a show. It was a mirror, a question. Would you let Jesus wash your feet? Could you look at the Savior, knowing your betrayals, your mistakes, your doubts, and let him kneel before you anyway? That question wrecked Jonathan. It wrecked the cast. And now, it's wrecking all of us. Because this scene isn't about the Last Supper. It's about surrender. And surrender always wrecks you before it saves you.